Desert of Exile. The twin suns beat down harshly on the desolate planet Iridian, casting intense light across endless sands and jagged rock formations. Exiled from her home and stripped of all possessions, Princess Lyra of the Celestial Dominion lay hidden in the meager shadow of a towering rock, her once regal silver hair now a tangled mess against the sand. For 3 days, she had endured the harsh conditions with only the instincts she had buried beneath years of royal etiquette and protocols. She closed her eyes, letting a bittersweet smile play on her lips as she remembered her former life. Exile was the punishment for her defiance, the price she paid for questioning the rigid traditions of her people. Still, she hadn't expected this. This cruel desert, with its unforgiving climate and complete isolation. She clutched her makeshift cover tightly, a crude wrap she'd fashioned from dry bark and plant fibers she had scavenged. It wasn't much, but it kept her alive during the freezing desert nights. As the larger sun began its descent, painting the sky in deep shades of red and purple, Laura knew she had to prepare for another cold night. But as she reached for her sparse collection of supplies, a distant hum cut through the quiet of the desert. She looked up, her keen vision scanning the sky, and saw it, a ship descending rapidly, throwing up clouds of red dust as it landed roughly a kilometer away. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this a rescue? No, she realized as she took in the rough, utilitarian design of the craft. It wasn't of Dominion origin. The ship was too basic, built for practicality, not the elegance her people favored. Curiosity overcame her caution, and she rose, moving from rock to rock, creeping closer to the vessel, her heart pounding with both hope and dread. The hatch of the ship opened with a soft hiss, and out stepped a figure clad in expedition gear. A human. Lyra's pulse quickened as she took in the sight of the tall, muscular man as he adjusted his equipment, surveying the landscape around him. She watched from behind her cover as he wiped sweat from his brow and muttered to himself, his voice carried by the gentle desert breeze. Atmospheric composition is stable. Surface temperature, hot as hell, he muttered, chuckling softly. Let's see what we're dealing with here. He raised a scanner, frowning as it started to emit strange readings. At that moment, Laura accidentally shifted her weight, causing a small rock to tumble down the slope. The sound made the man spin around, his gaze zeroing in on her position. For a long, tense moment, they stared at each other across the desert expanse. Laura hesitated, every instinct telling her to retreat, but the human's eyes held a warmth she hadn't seen in what felt like an eternity. She stepped out from behind the rocks, her movements slow and deliberate. The human's jaw dropped slightly, his eyes widening as he took in her rose-tinted skin and silver hair glowing in the twilight. "Ah, I'm Cade Matthews," he stammered, visibly struggling to process what he was seeing. "Earth Cartographic Survey, and are you real?" "Yes," Lyra replied, lifting her chin with royal dignity despite her disheveled appearance. "I am Princess Lyra of the Celestial Dominion." "Princess." Cade blinked, struggling to maintain his composure. His gaze flickered over her worn clothing, the slight injuries marking her skin. "What are you doing here, Princess?" "They sent me here as punishment," she replied, voice heavy with bitterness. "A trial to break my spirit, or so they hoped." He frowned, a mixture of concern and sympathy in his expression. "Punishment? But why?" "I dared to question their traditions," she said, shrugging. "They sent me to the desert to learn my place." Cade's expression hardened as he processed her words. "That's harsh. Leaving someone out here alone, inhumane, honestly." Lyra's lips twisted in a faint smile. A sentiment that few in the Dominion would agree with, but thank you for saying so. He hesitated, then gestured toward his ship. "Look, I've got supplies, food, water, even temperature controls. You're welcome to shelter in my ship until we figure out what to do next." Laura's gaze softened, but she shook her head slowly. "This desert is my prison. I'm not meant to leave even temporarily." Cade's jaw clenched as he looked around the desolate landscape, clearly unsettled by the thought of leaving her behind. "There's got to be some way to get you out of here," he said. "If you stay, it's only a matter of time before—" She cut him off, her eyes meeting his with a fierce resolve. "If you stay, Cade Matthews, it may be dangerous. There are side effects, from this place and from my presence." Effects. He looked at her curiously, but before he could question her further, his scanner began to emit strange signals again. Laura's voice was barely a whisper as she looked at him with a mix of warning and longing. "You're feeling it now, aren't you?" Cade looked down at his hands, feeling an odd tingling sensation coursing through him, a warmth that seemed to pull him toward her like a magnetic force. It was as though the desert itself was playing tricks on his mind, twisting his emotions, heightening his awareness of her in ways he couldn't explain. I think I am," he admitted, his voice tight as he struggled against the strange allure she radiated. "Stay back," she warned, taking a step back. "This attraction, it isn't natural. It's the influence of the desert, of the very soil we stand upon." But Cade felt himself moving closer despite her words, the energy between them growing stronger, more intense. He stopped himself, planting his feet firmly, fighting the overwhelming desire to reach out to her. "All right," he said, his voice strained but resolute. "But if I can help you survive here, I will." They stood in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. Cade handed her a small thermal blanket, his fingers brushing against hers, sending a spark through both of them that neither could ignore. "Thank you," Lyra whispered, clutching the blanket close as the desert night's cold began to set in. They watched each other in the growing darkness, each fighting against forces both within and beyond them, aware that whatever was happening between them might be as dangerous as the desert itself. The cold of the desert. The cold was unrelenting. As the last of the sun's warmth vanished, the desert's chill settled in, sharp and unforgiving. Cade glanced at Lyra, who shivered under the thin blanket he'd given her, her rose-tinted skin taking on an otherworldly glow in the pale moonlight. He knew she was struggling, yet he could also sense her resilience, something in her defiant stare that made him admire her all the more. "Inside my ship, there's enough warmth and supplies to get us through the night," Cade offered again, feeling the frost bite into his own skin. "You don't have to freeze out here." Lyra shook her head, her silver hair catching the moonlight. "I told you, Cade, this is my punishment. I'm not allowed comfort. The Dominion believes suffering is the way to humility." Cade clenched his jaw. "That's barbaric." Her eyes softened at his words, as if the unfamiliar kindness somehow pierced her defenses. "It may seem that way to you, but the Dominion is rooted in old traditions, and I was foolish enough to challenge them." "Foolish," Cade scoffed. "Where I come from, we admire people who stand up to outdated rules." She studied him, a flicker of warmth crossing her face. "Humans are strange creatures, Cade Matthews. You think with your hearts as much as your minds." "Is that so terrible?" he asked. "Not terrible, but dangerous," she replied, looking out into the endless dark, "especially here." A gust of icy wind swept across the sand, and Lyra tightened the blanket around herself. Cade could see her struggling against the cold, her body fighting against the elements with the only reserves she had left. He watched her, feeling the growing urge to do something, anything, to help her. "Listen," Cade said, moving a step closer. "If we stay out here, we're both going to freeze. I don't know what your traditions are, but I do know survival. And if that means breaking a few rules, I'm willing to do it." Lyra's gaze flickered, torn between the pull of tradition and the primal instinct to survive. After a long pause, she gave a slight nod. "Very well," she whispered. "But if we go in there, I must warn you. This place, this desert, it's amplifying something inside me. The energy between us, it's not natural. Being near you, especially in a closed space, would only make it stronger." Cade frowned, confused. "Are you saying this planet is affecting your emotions?" Yes, she admitted, her voice barely audible. We once believed these energies connected us to the stars, that they bound us to one another. But we've suppressed those beliefs for generations. If you stay close to me, Cade, that energy might make us feel things we can't control. He held her gaze, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes, and for a moment, he was almost lost in the shimmering depths. I'll take my chances, he replied, his voice steady. Surviving the night takes priority. They moved toward the ship, a heavy silence hanging between them. Inside, the warmth was immediate, the environmental controls humming softly as they entered. Lara looked around, her eyes landing on the modest living area with its seats and basic supplies. Cade led her to one of the seats and gestured for her to sit, handing her a ration pack and a flask of water. Here, he said, it's not much, but it'll help. She accepted it with a nod of thanks, taking small, careful sips. Cade could sense her hesitation, the internal struggle within her. It was as though the very walls of the ship intensified her presence, heightening the strange energy that crackled between them. He busied himself at the console, trying to focus on something, anything, that would take his mind off the inexplicable pull he felt. But the more he tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. There was an undeniable magnetic force in the air, something that seemed to pulse with every beat of his heart. You feel it too, don't you? Lara asked softly, breaking the silence. Cade looked at her, feeling a warmth rise in his chest. Yeah, it's like there's something in the air. I can't explain it, but it's real. She nodded, a shadow of sadness crossing her face. I was warned about this. My people call it the calling. It only happens on certain planets, places where the twin suns cast a unique energy. It's said to awaken ancient instincts, something we've long suppressed. Why suppress it? Cade asked, his curiosity piqued. Because it's unpredictable, dangerous even. The Dominion believes it's a weakness, something that can lead to unwanted consequences. Her eyes lingered on his, and Cade felt the weight of her words settle around him. So, what happens if we don't ignore it? He ventured, a slight tremor in his voice. Lyra's cheeks flushed, her gaze dropping. If we give in to it, we may become bound in ways we can't control. I don't know how to explain it, but the legends say that once two beings answer the calling, their fates are intertwined forever. Cade felt his heart pounding, an intense longing mixed with apprehension. He took a deep breath, grounding himself. Well, you've been alone out here for days. At the very least, you deserve some warmth and comfort. She glanced up, a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. Thank you, Cade. You're kinder than I expected a human to be. They sat in silence, the hum of the ship the only sound between them. Cade felt the tension in the air, the powerful allure that seemed to pull him closer to her, yet he fought to keep his distance, respecting her boundaries. But as the minutes passed, the cold in the cabin deepened despite the environmental controls. Cade checked the system, frowning. That's strange. The temperature regulation should be stable. Lyra's expression turned sullen. It's because of me. The energy I'm carrying. My people believe it disrupts technology. It's part of the punishment, to survive without relying on machines. I didn't realize it would extend this far. Well, that's convenient timing, Cade muttered, casting her a wry smile. Despite herself, Lyra smiled back. You might regret your kindness, Cade Matthews. I'll take my chances. They sat closer, the warmth of their bodies the only defense against the desert's biting cold. Cade could feel her shivering, and without thinking, he reached out, his hand resting gently on hers. She looked at him, her eyes wide, the flicker of light from the controls casting shadows across her face. The touch sparked something within him, a surge of energy that radiated between them like a current. He could feel the desert's influence, its strange power connecting them in ways he couldn't explain. It was as though the very fabric of the universe was pulling them together, binding them in a silent understanding. I shouldn't, Lyra whispered, but she made no move to pull away. Maybe not, Cade replied, his voice barely audible. But it feels like we're meant to. A moment of silence passed, their gazes locked. Then, without warning, the ship's systems began to flicker, the lights dimming before stabilizing again. Cade glanced at the console, his pulse quickening. What the? Lyra's voice was soft, almost resigned. This is the power of the calling. It disrupts technology, amplifies emotions, creates connections that go beyond physical touch. Cade looked at her, sensing the depth of her struggle, the battle between her sense of duty and her undeniable attraction to him. You're not alone anymore, Lyra. Whatever happens, I'm here. Her expression softened, the weight of her exile briefly lifting as she allowed herself a glimmer of hope. They sat together in silence, the tension between them palpable, the energy in the air thick with possibility. As the night wore on, Kay found himself drifting closer to her, feeling the invisible threads that seemed to bind them. And for a fleeting moment, he let himself wonder if perhaps, despite the odds, they were exactly where they were meant to be. Resonance of the stars. The desert night deepened, wrapping the ship in an endless silence that felt both haunting and strangely peaceful. Outside, the twin moons cast their pale light over the sands, creating an otherworldly glow that reflected faintly through the small cabin window. Cade and Lyra sat side by side, a fragile warmth bridging the space between them, their breaths mingling in the cold air. Cade watched Lyra as she stared out the window, her face thoughtful, her eyes reflecting the distant stars. She seemed lost in a world of memories, fragments of a life that felt as unreachable as the constellations above. He felt an urge to reach out, to comfort her, but the invisible pull between them grew stronger with every second. He had to be cautious, or risk losing himself to it. It must be strange for you, Cade murmured, breaking the silence. Being out here, away from everything you've known. Lyra glanced at him, her expression a mix of sadness and defiance. Strange doesn't begin to cover it. I was raised to believe that my destiny was predetermined, that my choices served the greater good of the Dominion. But standing up for my beliefs has left me here, alone. Not entirely alone, Cade said gently. A faint smile tugged at her lips. True, your presence is unexpected. They sat quietly for a moment, her fingers lightly tracing the frost forming on the window. I wonder if this is fate, she whispered. Our people see fate as a binding force, something that pulls us along a path we can't escape. Sometimes I wonder if my exile was meant to lead me here, to you. Kay felt a surge of emotion, his heart racing as he looked into her eyes. I'm no believer in fate, but if it's real, maybe it brought me here to help you. The words were simple, yet they held a promise that lingered in the air between them. Lyra looked down, visibly struggling with the storm of feelings she had been taught to suppress. Her people saw emotions as a weakness, a distraction from duty, but sitting here, so close to him, her resolve began to crack. A faint hum suddenly vibrated through the ship, pulling them both from the intensity of the moment. Cade's attention snapped to the control console, where the readings on the screen flickered erratically. He frowned, adjusting the dials, but nothing seemed to bring the systems back in line. What's going on? Lyra asked, her voice edged with concern. The ship's power core is experiencing fluctuations, Cade replied, his tone sharp with unease. It shouldn't be happening, unless... His voice trailed off as he realized the answer. He turned to Lyra, his eyes widening. Unless it's you. She bit her lip, a hint of guilt flashing across her face. This is what I was trying to explain. The calling amplifies certain energies in us. My people believe it can disrupt technology, especially in places like this. The stronger the connection, the more the interference. Cade ran a hand through his hair, absorbing her words. You mean, our connection? She nodded slowly, her gaze distant. My people used to believe the calling was a sign from the stars, that it was meant to bind two souls together, body and spirit. But over time, we came to fear it. Those who were called rarely returned. They would disappear, lost to the pull of their bond. Cade's pulse quickened as he looked at her. So, What you're saying is that, if we let this bond grow stronger, it could become irreversible. Yes, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Once it starts, there's no going back. A shiver ran down Cade's spine, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. His logical mind screamed at him to find a way out of this, to resist the pull of the calling, but his heart had other plans. He couldn't deny the strength of what he felt, the almost gravitational pull drawing him toward her. Lyra turned away, her gaze focused on the small, frost-covered window. In our legends, the calling is described as a resonance of the stars, a harmony that connects two people at a level so deep, it becomes part of their very being. Sounds like a fairy tale, Cade muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Perhaps, she replied, a soft, wistful smile playing at her lips. But fairy tale or not, it's real, and it's happening to us. He watched her, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. Despite his doubts, he couldn't deny the change within him, a sensation that felt almost primal, as if something ancient was awakening in his veins. It was irrational and yet undeniable. A sudden jolt rocked the ship, sending a shockwave through the cabin. Cade grabbed the edge of the console for support as warning lights flashed across the screen. Lyra clutched his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "What was that?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "Energy overload," he replied, his tone tense. "The core can't handle the interference." He quickly scanned the controls, his mind racing as he tried to find a solution. The ship was designed for extreme conditions, but this was beyond anything he'd anticipated. He realized with a sinking feeling that the closer he was to her, the more intense the interference would become. "Lyra, I think, if this bond is real, if it's affecting the ship, then maybe," he hesitated, searching her face, "maybe it's not safe for us to stay together." She flinched, pain flickering across her features. "Are you saying I'm a danger to you?" "No," Cade replied firmly, his hand resting on hers. "But the ship is struggling to keep up. If we're not careful, we could lose life support or even crash. We have to figure this out, or you might have to leave me," she finished, her voice hollow. The silence that followed was heavy, each of them grappling with the implications. Cade felt torn between his duty to survive and the powerful pull that bound him to her. He knew that leaving her wasn't an option he could entertain, but staying might mean the end of them both. "There has to be a way," he said finally, determination hardening his voice. "We can't just give in to whatever this is. Maybe there's a way to control it." Lyra looked at him, a glimmer of hope breaking through the despair in her eyes. "You're a stubborn one, Cade Matthews." He managed a faint smile. "Comes with being human. We don't give up so easily." As the hours wore on, they worked together, searching for a way to stabilize his ship's systems. Cade tried rerouting the energy flow and recalibrating the core, but nothing seemed to reduce the strange interference. It was as if the ship itself resisted their attempts, bound by the same invisible force that linked them. Eventually, exhaustion settled over them. They leaned back in their seats, breathing heavily, their efforts fruitless. The desert night outside was still, an endless void stretching beyond the fragile walls of the ship. But within the cabin, the air felt charged, almost alive, pulsing with a strange resonance between them. Lyra's hand found his, and he didn't pull away. He met her gaze, the faint glow in her eyes mirroring his own emotions. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "thank you, Cade. You could have left me out there, but you didn't." "Leaving you was never an option," he replied, his voice rough with sincerity. "I'd rather face whatever this is than go back to an empty ship." A soft smile crossed her lips as she leaned closer, her fingers tracing the lines of his hand. "We may be bound by forces beyond us, Cade, but it doesn't feel like a punishment anymore. It feels right." He felt his heart beat faster, a warmth spreading through him as her words settled in. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the calling wasn't a curse but a gift, something that had brought them together in a way that defied logic. And as they sat in silence, their hands entwined, the night seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, bound together by a resonance that echoed through the stars, a connection that was both terrifying and beautiful. Secrets of the Ancient Sands. The dawn crept over the horizon, casting a soft amber glow through the cabin window. Cade awoke to find Lyra sitting beside him, her gaze fixed on the landscape outside. In the quiet of the morning, she seemed otherworldly, a figure sculpted by light and shadow, her silver hair catching the first rays of the sun. He watched her in silence, struck by the peacefulness of her expression. "You're awake," she said softly, noticing his gaze. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't," Cade replied, sitting up. The warmth of her hand still lingered in his, and he found himself reluctant to let it go. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. For the first time since their encounter, he felt truly at ease. As the morning light strengthened, Lyra's attention returned to the window, her expression growing serious. Cade followed her gaze, frowning as he noticed a faint glimmer on the horizon, a mirage-like shimmer that seemed to distort the landscape. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but it sent a ripple of unease through him. "What is that?" he asked, leaning closer to get a better view. Lyra's eyes narrowed, her face unreadable. "I don't know. I've seen it before in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a mirage, but..." Her voice trailed off, a faint note of curiosity mingling with uncertainty. Cade studied the shimmer, his mind racing. Mirages don't stay in one place, and that looks like it's moving. They exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. Wordlessly, they stood and gathered their gear, preparing to venture outside. The ship's systems were still unstable, and Cade knew that any further delays could compromise their chances of survival. But the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist. As they stepped out into the crisp morning air, the desert stretched before them, vast and desolate, broken only by the distant shimmer on the horizon. Cade adjusted his equipment, his gaze fixed on the glimmer, while Lyra walked beside him, her movements graceful and measured. They walked in silence, their footsteps echoing softly across the sands. Cade felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if something monumental awaited them, hidden just beyond the horizon. The bond between them pulsed faintly, a constant reminder of the connection they shared, a force that seemed to guide their every step. As they drew closer to the shimmering mirage, Cade noticed that the air around them had begun to change. The temperature fluctuated, shifting from hot to cold, and the sand beneath their feet seemed to pulse with a strange energy. Lyra stopped, her eyes widening as she gazed at the shimmering landscape before them. "It's not just a mirage," she murmured, her voice filled with awe. "It's something else." Cade frowned, his hand tightening on his scanner as he adjusted the settings. The readings were unlike anything he had ever seen, a series of energy spikes and fluctuations that defied explanation. Whatever it is, it's generating an enormous amount of energy. This isn't natural. They continued forward, the shimmer growing clearer with every step. It was like a veil, a thin layer of energy that separated them from something hidden within the desert. Cade felt his pulse quicken as they approached, a sense of discovery filling him. "Should we go through?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cade hesitated, his instincts warning him of the risks, but the allure of the unknown was too strong. Only one way to find out. They exchanged a final glance, then stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the shimmering veil. The air shifted around them, and for a moment, Cade felt as if he was walking through water, the world distorted and hazy. But as they emerged on the other side, his breath caught in his throat. Before them lay a hidden oasis, a lush valley nestled within the desert's heart, its emerald waters glistening under the morning sun. Ancient stone structures rose from the sands, covered in intricate carvings and symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly light. Lyra gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she took in the sight. This is impossible. There are no records of such a place." Cade stared in awe, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The oasis was like a dream, a place that defied all logic, a hidden sanctuary within the desolate desert. This must be why the energy readings were so strong, he murmured. The structures, the symbols, it's all connected. They walked forward, their steps cautious as they explored the ancient ruins. The air was thick with mystery, the silence heavy with secrets long buried beneath the sands. Cade's gaze traveled over the carvings, his fingers tracing the symbols etched into the stone. These symbols, he said, his voice filled with wonder. They look like star maps. This isn't just a sanctuary, it's a place of knowledge. Lyra nodded, her eyes shining with excitement. My people once believed in a celestial connection, a link between us and the stars. But we lost that knowledge, abandoned it for the sake of order and tradition. This place, perhaps it holds the answers we've been seeking. They continued exploring, moving deeper into the ruins. The air grew cooler, and Cade felt a faint hum resonating through the ground, a rhythm that seemed to echo in his very bones. He glanced at Lyra, who appeared equally affected, her eyes wide with awe. "It's calling to us," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Do you feel it?" He nodded, unable to find the words to express what he was feeling. The bond between them pulsed with renewed strength, an invisible force that seemed to resonate with the energy around them, connecting them to the ancient power that flowed through the ruins. As they approached the center of the oasis, they found a large stone pedestal, its surface covered in intricate carvings. Cade's gaze lingered on the symbols, his mind racing as he tried to decipher their meaning. Lyra stepped forward, her hand resting on the stone, her fingers tracing the patterns with reverence. "These symbols, they tell a story," she murmured. "A story of unity, of two souls bound by fate, destined to become one with the stars." Cade's heart pounded as he listened to her words, a strange sense of recognition filling him. He reached out, placing his hand beside hers on the stone, and felt a surge of energy flow through him, a warmth that filled his entire being. "It's us, isn't it?" he whispered, the realization dawning on him. "This place, the calling, it was all leading us here." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and wonder. "I don't know what this means, Cade, but whatever it is, it's bigger than us." They stood in silence, their hands resting on the stone, their hearts beating in unison. The energy around them pulsed, growing stronger with every passing second, until it felt as though the very air was alive with possibility. Cade could feel the bond between them solidifying, an unbreakable connection that transcended time and space. But as the energy reached its peak, a sudden tremor shook the ground, and the oasis seemed to pulse with a dark, foreboding energy. Cade and Lyra stepped back, their gazes fixed on the pedestal as cracks began to spread across its surface. "Something's wrong," Lyra whispered, her voice laced with fear. "This isn't supposed to happen." Cade grabbed her hand, pulling her back as the tremor intensified. The oasis was changing, its once serene beauty turning chaotic as the energy spiraled out of control. The symbols on the pedestal glowed with an ominous light, and the air grew thick with an oppressive force. "We need to get out of here," Cade said urgently, his grip on her hand tightening. But as they turned to flee, a blinding flash of light erupted from the pedestal, and a wave of energy swept over them, enveloping them in its powerful embrace. Kay felt his body grow weightless, his mind flooded with images and sensations that defied explanation. He saw stars, endless galaxies, stretching out before him, a vast expanse of light and darkness that pulsed with life. He felt Lyra's presence beside him, her essence merging with his, their souls entwining in a bond that transcended the physical. Then, just as suddenly, the vision faded, and he found himself back in the oasis, his body weak and trembling. He looked at Lyra, who appeared equally shaken, her eyes filled with a mixture of awe and terror. What just happened?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Lyra took a shaky breath, her gaze fixed on the ruins. "We've awakened something ancient. I don't fully understand it, but I think This was the true purpose of the calling. They stood in silence, the weight of their discovery settling over them. The oasis had returned to its original state, its serene beauty restored, but Cade knew that nothing would ever be the same. They had crossed a threshold, glimpsed a truth that defied all logic, and he knew that the bond between them was now unbreakable. As they turned to leave, a sense of purpose filled him, a certainty that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The desert had tested them, forged them, and in the heart of its ancient sands, they had found each other. And as they stepped back into the endless expanse of the desert, hand in hand, Cade felt a quiet confidence settle within him. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Awakening the power within, the heat of the desert had returned, baking the sound underfoot as Cade and Lyra made their way back to the ship. Yet, everything felt different now. Their experience in the oasis had left them changed, bound by an invisible force that neither of them fully understood. Cade felt it with every step, a new sense of purpose pulsing through him, an awareness of Lyra's presence beside him that went far beyond mere companionship. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Lyra walked slightly ahead, her expression distant, as if lost in memories of her people's old legends. Cade watched her, marveling at the strength she exuded despite the weight of her exile, her defiance against tradition, and now the mystery of the bond they shared. As they neared the ship, Lyra finally spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "We have awakened something, Cade. Something that has lain dormant for centuries. My people once believed in the power of these ancient bonds, but we spent so long suppressing them that the true nature of this connection is now more legend than knowledge. Do you think this bond will change us?" Cade asked, his heart racing at the thought. She looked at him, a mixture of fear and wonder in her eyes. "It already has. I can feel it within me. This energy, this resonance. It's like a fire that's been ignited, something I can't control or even fully comprehend. But it's powerful, and it's alive." They entered the ship, its metallic interior feeling almost foreign after the surreal beauty of the oasis. Cade moved to the console, running a quick systems check, but his thoughts were on Lyra, on the bond that seemed to hum between them, stronger than before. Lyra stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the screen as it displayed a series of erratic energy readings. The ship's systems are still destabilizing. Whatever we've awakened is affecting everything around us. Cade's brow furrowed as he adjusted the controls. If this bond is linked to the energy of the planet, maybe there's a way to channel it, to use it without letting it overwhelm us. But first, we need to understand it. Lyra's eyes flickered with interest, a spark of determination igniting within her. Then let's start with what we know. The calling, the bond, is something my people once embraced. They believed it connected us to the stars, to the universe itself. But over time, it was seen as a danger, something unpredictable and uncontrollable. "Why would they abandon it?" Cade asked, curious. "Because bonds like this can lead to permanent changes," she replied, her tone cautious. "It's said that those who answered the calling would gain powers beyond the understanding of even the Dominion. The legends say they would become one with the planet, with each other, merging their spirits in ways that defy physical limitations. But it comes at a cost." Cade felt a shiver run down his spine. A cost. "Yes," she replied, looking down. "A merging so complete that individuality can be lost, absorbed into something greater. The Dominion saw it as a risk to the order they valued. Losing one's identity, becoming part of something larger, they feared it." He was silent, processing her words. "Do you fear it?" She met his gaze, a shadow of vulnerability crossing her face. "Yes, but at the same time, it feels like the answer to something I've been searching for my entire life. It's as if I've been incomplete, and now with you, I feel whole." Her words struck something deep within Cade, a part of himself that had been dormant until this very moment. He felt an unexplainable need to protect her, to see this journey through to whatever end awaited them. And as he looked into her eyes, he realized he was willing to face any cost if it meant staying by her side. A sudden, powerful pulse of energy surged through the ship, causing the lights to flicker. Cade grabbed the edge of the console, his heart pounding as the pulse intensified, resonating with the bond between them. Lyra gasped, clutching her chest as the energy flowed through her, her eyes wide with awe and fear. "It's happening again," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The energy, it's drawing us closer." Cade felt it too, a pull that was impossible to resist. It was as if their very souls were entwining, merging in a way that went beyond physical connection. He reached out, his hand finding hers, and the moment they touched, the energy around them exploded, filling the cabin with a brilliant, shimmering light. The sensation was overwhelming, a flood of memories, emotions, and sensations that weren't his own. He felt Lyra's life, her struggles, her dreams, her fears, all pouring into him like a river, and he knew she was feeling the same, experiencing his life as if it were her own. They stood there, frozen in the moment, their minds and hearts merging, becoming one. Cade felt his perception expand, reaching beyond the boundaries of his own consciousness, touching something vast and infinite. He could feel the planet, its ancient energy, its pulse that matched the beat of his own heart. And through it all, he felt Lyra, her essence woven into his, a part of him that could never be separated. The light faded, leaving them both breathless, their hands still clasped. They looked at each other, a newfound understanding passing between them. Words were unnecessary. They knew each other's souls as intimately as their own. "What was that?" Cade finally managed, his voice hoarse with awe. Lyra took a shaky breath, her eyes filled with wonder. "That was the calling. We've become part of each other, Cade. Our lives, our destinies, they're bound together now." He felt a surge of emotion, a fierce protectiveness that went beyond anything he'd ever experienced. "Then whatever happens, we'll face it together." She nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes, together." A sudden beeping from the console drew their attention, breaking the intense moment. Cade glanced at the screen, his eyes widening as he read the data. "We're receiving a transmission. It's from your people." Lyra stiffened, her expression guarded. "The Dominion." Cade nodded. "They must have detected the energy spike. They're sending a reconnaissance vessel. We don't have much time." Her face hardened, a mixture of defiance and fear flashing across her features. "They'll try to bring me back, to end the calling before it can fully awaken." Cade felt a surge of anger, a fierce determination to protect her from whatever threat lay ahead. "Then we'll fight them, if we have to." Lyra's hand tightened around his. "They won't understand, Cade. The Dominion fears what they can't control. They'll see us as a threat, something that must be contained." He met her gaze, his resolve unbreakable. "Let them come. I'm not losing you." The console beeped again, indicating the approach of the Dominion ship. Cade checked the radar, his heart racing as he saw the vessel descending toward them, its sleek design unmistakable. He knew that their options were limited, that they were facing a force far beyond their own capabilities. But as he looked at Lyra, he felt an unexplainable confidence, a strength that flowed from the bond they shared. They were no longer alone, no longer bound by the limitations of their past lives. They were something new, something powerful, a force that the Dominion could not understand. Lyra's eyes flashed with determination as she turned to him. "We have one advantage, Cade. The energy we've awakened, it's within us now. The calling has granted us a power that even the Dominion can't control." He nodded, understanding what she meant. "Then let's use it. Together." They stood side by side, their hands entwined, their hearts beating as one. The energy between them pulsed, growing stronger, filling them with a power that went beyond physical strength, a force that resonated with the very essence of the planet. As the Dominion ship descended, its sleek form casting a shadow over the desert sands, Cade and Lyra braced themselves, ready to face whatever lay ahead. They were bound by the calling, united by a bond that defied explanation, and they knew that no force in the universe could break the connection they shared. And as the Dominion ship touched down, its engines humming with ominous intent, Cade felt a surge of courage, a fierce determination that burned within him. He glanced at Lyra, her face set with unyielding resolve, and he knew that they were ready. They had become something greater than themselves, a force that resonated with the stars, with the ancient energy of the planet. They were no longer just Cade and Lyra. They were something more, something unstoppable. And as the doors of the Dominion ship opened, and the figures within stepped out to confront them, Cade felt a quiet confidence settle over him. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers awaited, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: they would face it together.